And I'm back to the beginning of respiration again. Cellular respiration. I got a red pen this time. Why? We're going to really put some red marks on this. Cellular respiration is an oxidation process because glucose is becoming oxidized and oxygen's become, it's a redox reaction, Glucose is becoming oxidized and oxygen is becoming reduced. Redox. Okay? But what if oxygen wasn't there? Would we still oxidize? And I know you want to think oxygen. Do you have to have oxygen to oxidize? No, remember Leo says Ger. Oxidize is just losing electrons. Okay? What's going to happen to the glucose? How many ATPs are we going to get if oxygen isn't present? And when would oxygen not be present? Well, oxygen might not be present in your muscles, okay, if you're out of shape. When you're in shape, you got lots of blood vessels feeding all your little nooks and crannies of your muscles, okay? And when you're out of shape, did you ever be out of shape and it's before a season and the coach makes you run? And you run, you go home that night and you're tired and you just sit. And the next day you're sore. Why are you sore? Lactic acid. But why are you sore? You're out of shape. You didn't get oxygen to all those little nooks and crannies that you start to use. Whenever you use muscles that you haven't used in a while, they're going to still work for you, but they're not going to get oxygen delivered there so much. You don't have as many blood supply getting in there. Being in shape actually gives you a better blood supply, better delivery system for oxygen. But it doesn't mean you're terribly out of shape, because you can take someone like Usain Bolt. He's got major muscles, right? He's got big, bulky muscles. His big, bulky muscles actually do not have a good feed of blood supply into them, but yet he's in good shape, right? So what his body is more geared towards is what we're going to call anaerobic respiration. So we're not going to see so much of a flow of electrons in anaerobic respiration. And you know why? We don't have oxygen there at the end. Remember in oxidative phosphorylation, we had the oxygen pulling all the electrons through. Well, if oxygen's not there, what's going to happen? So if we don't have oxygen here, we want to still make ATPs, okay? Will we still make carbon dioxide and water? Not too well, okay? We're going to cross them out. But we are still going to break down that glucose, and we're going to get a little ATP out of it. And how are we going to do that? Well, let's look at these flow of electrons. Nothing of this is going to happen. So what are we going to have? If we don't have any NADs, what do we have? We do have glucose that's going to form pyruvate, right? But those NADs aren't going to be able to be pulled out. So it's going to be pyruvate and NADs, okay? Pyruvate and NADs are going to make a whole nother compound, or one of two compounds. It's either going to be what we call lactic acid fermentation or anaerobic respiration, or it's going to be alcohol fermentation, okay? When pyruvate connects with NADs, it's either going to form lactic acid or alcohol. Let me show you how, okay? So let's put this aside and let's look at this. This is fermentation or anaerobic respiration, or simply put, it's just glycolysis. Just glycolysis. That's all that's going to go on. So where's this going to take place? Just in the cytoplasm. We do not have oxygen, so we're not even going into the mitochondria. And that's good for bacteria since they don't even have a mitochondria. At least bacteria will be able to do glycolysis. And all bacteria actually always do anaerobic respiration. Kind of. There's exceptions to the rules, and we won't get into that. So here are the two types of anaerobic respiration. We have lactic acid fermentation here and alcoholic fermentation here. Remember, fermentation is the same thing as anaerobic respiration. It's respiration with no oxygen. But it is just going to be glycolysis. That's the only step that's going to happen. And if you remember, glycolysis is still going to give us, in the end, we're still going to get plus 2 ATPs, okay? But we're going to get these waste products. How does it happen? Here's glucose. We're going to try and rev it up by giving it 2 ATPs. Remember that investment phase? But here come the NADs. Now they can't carry these electrons out. So they're going to get stuck in here. When glucose ultimately conforms or changes to pyruvate, those NADs are kind of stuck in there with their electrons. They leave their electrons here instead of passing them off into oxidative phosphorylation. When those electrons stay there, they make lactate. So add 2 electrons to the 2 pyruvates, and you got 2 lactates. That's your lactic acid. That's going to make your muscles sore. And it's also going to be like a poison to your muscles. It's going to stop you from going any further. And this is why Usain Bolt, he can run 100 yards or a 100-meter dash, but he can't go much further than that. And yet those like marathon guys with like the slow twitch muscles, they can go and go and go and go. It's because they're using aerobic respiration. Usain Bolt's muscles are just using anaerobic. This is a very fast reaction. It can go chicka, 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 and churn out lots of ATPs, but it won't last long because when that lactic acid forms, it kind of stops everything after a while. Okay? Now, what else can happen? Well, in some bacteria and yeast, the glucose, instead of being changed to pyruvate, those electrons stay. But here's what happens. When the electrons stay here, they knock off a couple of the carbon atoms and they form carbon dioxide and this substance, ethanol. That's ethyl alcohol. That's booze. Let me write booze here. Booze. Okay? This is what we really used to say. We just, in the olden days, when Mrs. Horner first started teaching, we just called this fermentation. And we just called this anaerobic respiration. But they're both anaerobic respiration. So I guess they said, oh, we'll call them both fermentations. But one's alcohol fermentation because alcohol is produced and a lot of carbon dioxide. And the other one, lactic acid. So we call that lactic acid fermentation or alcoholic anaerobic respiration. Lactic acid, anaerobic respiration. They're both going to produce these poisons, okay, that are going to stop this process after a while, but they do still get the net investing of 2 ATPs, but still 4 ATPs are going to come out, okay? They're kind of showing 2 ATPs are forming. You need to know that we're still investing 2 ATPs and getting 4 out. They're just kind of showing the net total. We get 2 ATPs out. I'm going to write that down here. We still invest 2 ATPs, but get 4 ATPs. So here is our total 2 ATPs. And on this side too. We invest 2, we get 4 out, so we gain 2 ATPs. And it goes fast. So we can get those 2 ATPs pretty fast, but it won't last long. Okay? Now, we talked about this. This makes sore muscles, but a little bit more about ethyl alcohol. Alcoholic fermentation. Alcohol. Yes, this is what all the booze companies do. When they make, all your scotches and your whiskeys and your ryes and your rums and your vodkas and all that stuff, they go through a fermentation process and they let the carbon dioxide get released. But when alcohol companies go through a fermentation process of like hops and barley and wheat, they leave the carbon dioxide in and then you're going to get beer, right? Beer is going to form that way. But when you do it on grapes with yeast, you're going to let the carbon dioxide get released and you're going to get wine. But if you keep the carbon dioxide in there, you're going to get champagne, the bubbly stuff, okay? But one other thing, one of my favorites, when you leave the carbon dioxide in, you get ethyl alcohol, and this is in bread making. If you've ever made bread, when you put the yeast in there, the yeast is going to go through anaerobic respiration. It's going to produce ethanol. Okay, that's what's all over the dough. When you go to knead the dough, there's a lot of alcohol like in there. And the carbon dioxide is going to make the dough rise. That's what's going to make the bread rise. And then when you put the bread in the oven, it burns off all the alcohol. The smell of baking bread is actually the smell of burning off alcohol, ethyl alcohol. Okay, so the next time you smell bread, like baking, I have a bread machine at home. I love the smell. Okay, it's like burning alcohol. And then the carbon dioxide is what's causing the bread to rise. It's great. Okay, but one more thing. Let's go back to this. Lactic acid fermentation. Bacteria do this. They don't get sore muscles. They don't have muscles. But bacteria that's in like some milk products, like that lactobacillus bacteria that they put in milk, is actually going to make yogurt and cheeses. So yogurt and cheese have bacteria in them. You've heard that before. They have bacteria in them. That's what flavors them. That's what makes them like yogurt. It actually, the bacteria is going through lactic acid fermentation. So there's lactic acid in your yogurt. There's lactic acid in cheeses. And then you go and eat it. Is it poisonous that way? No, because it breaks down your digestive system. But it gives it a little bit of a nip. Okay. That's why cheese has like kind of a sharp taste. And sometimes the sharper it is, the higher lactic acid content it has. Yogurt doesn't have so much of a nip, but it has more of a nip than sour cream. Taste yogurt, taste sour cream. Yogurt, especially your Greek yogurts, even have more of a little nip, a little sharpness to it. Okay, because they have more of that lactic acid in it. So this is anaerobic respiration. We talked about aerobic. That's when it goes through all the steps. But anaerobic, just glycolysis, and you're only going to get 2 ATPs, and you're going to get these waste products that are going to basically stop it before it really can get going. So this cannot go for a while. This is why Usain Bolt cannot run more than 100 meters or 200 meters. But those marathon men, oh my goodness, those marathon men, they're going through all the steps, okay, because they're breathing. They have oxygen getting to all their nooks and crannies, and that's why they can go further. And at the end of a race, they're not even tired, okay, because they've been using oxygen the whole time. They don't have to get any oxygen in to release that lactic acid, because at the end of a Usain Bolt race, he's all like, because now he's got to blow off this lactic acid. He's got to get oxygen in there to remove those electrons and not poison his body. That's how he is in shape, because his body knows how to recover from this fast. And not everybody's built like him. You know, most of us are somewhere in between. But you can look at people like a track coach might say, like, oh, you're going to be a sprinter. And what would that sprinter look like? He'd be bulky. Okay. But then he'd see this skinny, scrawny kid come out and he'd be like, you're going to be running my distance events. You're the cross country runner. Yeah, I know there's some of you out there. The skinnier, long, lanky people. I always think of Carly Toole, who graduated a few years ago. She was skinny and long and lanky, and that girl could run for like miles and miles and miles on end, right? But then there was like people that were like sprinters. I think in track, you know, and some of you track guys might know the sprinters. Sometimes they take some of the football players and they put them in just the sprinting events because that's as far as they can go. Because football players, let's face it, especially that front line, the defensive line and the offensive line, they are like built strong. They're more lactic acid guys, okay? They have short, fast twitch muscles. They can react really fast, but then they get really tired, okay? And that's why they have to like change up, okay? But a long distance runner, not this, the Carly Tools out there, they are going through all the steps of respiration, okay? Producing many more ATPs. And that's it, and that's a lot. So take that in. You'll have a worksheet that you'll be doing on this and answering a few questions, plus finishing up your review sheet on that. All right, guys, that's it for this unit. Bye.